If it goes right, it's a slice. If it goes left, it's a hook. If it goes straight, it's a miracle. This is Out of Bounds. If it's happening in the world of golf, we're talking about it. Coverage, debate, discussion, pro golf and local golf. Let's do it. This is Out of Bounds. And here are your hosts, Nate Sharman and Josh Durso.
All right, the first edition of the 2024 FedEx Cup Playoffs is in the books. Welcome back to Out of Bounds. We have got a packed show for you today as we lunge toward the second week of the playoffs with renewed debate about the format leading the way. Nate, a big weekend for Hideki Matsuyama, who went wire to wire. How's that?
Yeah, big time for Hideki. Gets his second win of 2024, right, Josh? He won the Genesis earlier in the year. That he came by 7 strokes in that event. This one he won a little differently, won wire to wire. Also won the bronze medal in the Olympics, so a big season for Hideki so far. He pushes himself into number 3. We've talked in the FedEx Cup standings. We've talked so much about Scheffler and Xander, but Hideki says, remember guys, I'm right here, and vaults himself into number 3. So pretty cool stuff by Hideki, especially on that back 9. It looked like Hideki was going to kind of lose that lead. He made a bogey on 12, bogey on 13, double on 14, and all of a sudden the lead was gone. But Josh, he birdies 17 and 18, takes a very aggressive line on 18 when he didn't need to, but still made it like a lot of fun to watch with that water at TPC Southwind, and grabs the victory. First, a big playoff victory for Hideki Matsuyama. Just keeps adding to that trophy case, Josh. What an incredible player.
Yeah, and doing it without some pretty crucial components of his team, right? At least his caddy was left behind. I believe 1 or 2 of his coaches were as well. To win an event like this after coming off of a really good performance, to your point, medaling in Paris without those members of your team, that's impressive stuff.
Yeah, Josh, what do you think his old caddies, or what do you think his regular caddy, I should say, is sort of thinking as he's sitting on the sideline, seeing him win without him, right? Is he kind of thinking that he might be replaceable? Is Hideki thinking that? I don't think much thoughts are going to change between Hideki and his team, right? They're going to use what has worked in the past, right? But it's still funny to think about. If
I'm his caddy, I want to get back on the bag so fast.
I'm pretty sure he'll be back on the bag this week at the BMW. I'm pretty sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no doubt about that. A big weekend for a lot of reasons, not just who's going to actually win that event and put themselves in contention, the rest of the way through the playoffs, but the players who were in and the players who were out. Let's start with the players who made the top 50, which obviously big implications heading into the BMW. Top 50 means that you are good to go next year. You're in the signature events. That's huge. Maybe a little underplayed, frankly, as we came down the wire. But when you look at the players who did make it or who made a big jump this past weekend, who stands out to you?
So I got on here last week and I talked about how Viktor Hovland has had this atrocious year after winning the FedEx Cup last year, winning the BMW, playing well in the Ryder Cup, and just continuing to build off that, and how he's had just an atrocious year and found himself in the 50s, right? Out on the outside looking in at the BMW. He then turns around and plays spectacular golf at the FedEx St. Jude, has a big week, T2, and moves into, I believe it was 17th, right? And coming into a tournament that he won last year. He won, like I said, won at Eastlake too as well. And just a huge momentous spot for Viktor Hovland to play really good golf and kind of vault himself up the standings. So, maybe Viktor heard me last week on the podcast, just talk about his bad year, and he went with it and played really good golf. But Josh, it seemed like he was just playing a lot more free out there and just knows that he needed to play spectacular golf to put him in position. And that's just what he did.
Not necessarily saying that he's going to go out and, be world beater the next 2 weeks, but I'm curious, from your perspective, does this save his season?
Josh, I don't know if it saves his season, but the fact that he just gets back to Eastlake, I think, is a huge component for his confidence, right? I know this is a guy that won at Eastlake last year. If he's able to just not even make Eastlake at all the following year, then you're really, really wondering what was going on with Viktor Hovland. But it looks like he'll be there next week. So huge spot for Viktor Hovland. I think more so than looking at his whole season as a whole, Josh, from the outsider perspective, but just for that inside player confidence, I think this was huge for Hovland.
Yeah, I had a few players because you look at this list, the top 50 as it stands, and it's so interesting. There are so many players that we just, backtrack 2 months. We never would have expected to be there. Max Gracerman stands out to me. What a turnaround in 2 weeks. He has the insane collapse last week where basically 4 or 5 holes cost him the entire tournament. But now he's in the top 50 and he's in all of the signature events next year. That's huge. Nick Dunlap, all of a sudden, this guy's entered the Ludwig chat. I see a potential serious rivalry there moving forward. A 20, 21-year-old, a guy who is very much the Ludwig of Team USA in the future, I think.
Right. Yeah, he's the future of American golf.
Yeah. And then on top of that, throw these names at you, Nate. Shane Lowry, Billy Horschel, Adam Scott. 3 guys who, when you go back in the last 3 or 4 months, we had questions about whether we were even going to see them in high profile events moving forward. And they're locked. They're in for everything next year. It is a very, very interesting turnaround for some guys who, took advantage of what they had to. Adam Scott had to go through qualifying for the last major. The implications of that top 50 are real. But those 3 names to me really stand out as like, wow, they're in.
Yeah, that's really cool for Shane Lowry because before that win with Rory McIlroy at the Zurich, we really weren't sure with where Shane Lowry was going. And Shane Lowry, at the end of the day, Josh, is just a guy you need in all your high profile events because he's a guy that's so relatable, right? He's always going to be laughing and smiling and talking and working with the crowd too as well. So Josh, just the guy you need to have there in Shane Lowry, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about players on the outside looking in. Who is among the most notable here outside the top 50 now?
The biggest one to me is Tom Kim, who sits right at 51. And it looked like Tom was going to be able to play good enough golf to finish inside the top 50. That's kind of where he was tracking all day. And then he finished his bogey on 16, double on 17, double on 18 to land himself at 51. And Josh, that's just crazy for a guy like Tom Kim. He's played decently well this year, not super good. But Josh, it was interesting after the round and throughout the next couple of days. Tom was kind of under a little bit of scrutiny. I believe it was on the 12th hole, Josh. He may have in anger a little bit. I don't know if damaged is the right word, but to the green on I believe it was number 12. And Josh, a lot of people were not happy with that. So Tom put out a statement about it, how it was not his intention, which if you watch the video, Josh, it definitely wasn't his intention. And he ends the statement with it being using the word tough year. And I think that kind of encapsulates everything for Tom. That's kind of the way I think he should feel and the way he does feel, of course. So I think that's kind of a good spot for Tom to kind of get that out in front of him and show that's, I played okay at times, but overall it was a tough year for me.
He's fine, right? Like he's good. We know he's going to be around. We know he's not going anywhere. He's going to have to figure out what the process is going to be for him getting back to the high profile events next year because he doesn't have that automatic entry. But at 20, he's in his low 20s still learning. Something that I think is lost when we see some of these guys bust out onto the scene and just immediately start winning, as so many of them do now in the early stages of their career, is the learning that still has to happen. The learning curve that still definitely exists for these guys on tour. There's so much to navigate even after you get a high profile win. For me, I think it's Jordan Spieth. Like Jordan Spieth is the one that stands out to me. And I know it's gotten a lot of talk time, but earlier this year, and I've talked about it a couple times on the podcast now, I've asked or I've wondered about what is the prime of a professional golfer's career in this new landscape. And I think because we grew up during the Tiger era, so we just think like prime or previously we might have thought prime is, say, late 20s to mid to late 30s. And, Jordan Spieth, like so many guys in their low 30s, really struggling. I genuinely wonder if prime hasn't shifted up 5 or so years, where your prime, because of the speed at which really great golfers are coming up and the frequency that they're coming up, that maybe prime is in its 20s for professional golf now.
Yeah, Josh, I think you're onto something there, because we've seen so much difference in swings and how these guys are taking swings to the golf ball, right? And Josh, it doesn't seem like with all the speed these guys have gained, a lot of these guys are seeing injuries, right? I mean, we have Jordan Spieth who's nursing that wrist injury, and hopefully he goes and gets that fixed over the offseason and fires back next year with a vengeance, right? And that sounds like that's what he's going to do. But yeah, Josh, it definitely is onto something where that the prime of that golf might be shifting a few years, like you were saying.
Yeah, and also, another element of this might also be the amount of money that's tied up in professional golf now, where if you wanted to really make an ungodly amount of money, you needed to play really well over a span of 10 or 15 or maybe longer years, especially during the 90s, 2000s, and early 2010s. But now we're in a situation where you can just have a 1 or 2 good seasons on the PGA Tour and you make career money, or what would have been defined as career money not that long ago. So you wonder how and it's just part of it, but you wonder like how you stay motivated to be among the best of the best when everything is sort of doled out for you in terms of, how much money you're making and your finances. Not saying that that's like a motivating factor for these guys in terms of being able to like eat and sleep and have shelter and whatnot. But, it's interesting because I think it's changed the equation, so to speak, in terms of what is going into, or what these guys are putting into their careers, at what stages they're putting into their careers. I really question whether we'll ever see like Justin Rose's or Adam Scott's, guys in their 40s with the will to compete at the level that they're competing at presently, when we are talking about, the crop of golfers who are in their, low to mid 20s, if they aren't literally considered one of the 1 or 2 or 3 best players of their generation.
Yeah, Josh, all you need is a flash in the pan, 1 or 2 years where you're shooting out of your mind, right, to make a ton of money in the PGA Tour. So yeah, that's definitely something that I think we could see. There are some guys I think that will find their way into those sort of roles, those sort of Adam Scott or Justin Rose roles, I think. But yeah, definitely will be fewer of them, especially with, in 20 years or 15, 20 years, when we have guys getting to that age, right, we're going to have young guys hitting it even further, right, than they are now, and the guys shooting even lower scores than they are now. So yeah, it couldn't happen. It could happen. Okay,
so I have a question for you. It's about the top 50 and the auto qualifying factor. Last week on the podcast, I said that the top 50, or the countdown to the top 50, should be, frankly, a point of emphasis within the PGA Tour season and the playoffs, and there should be some buildup and juice around that. We're going to talk here in a bit about the playoffs and kind of being a little lackluster as presently constructed. But do you think people actually care about this top 50 auto qualify factor that we have in play right now for signature events the following season?
I think they do, Josh, and I think because it's sort of easy to follow in a way. I think they do a great job on the broadcast on Sunday, kind of showing where guys are and where they're moving around, right? So I think, they talked about that on the broadcast a lot. And Josh, I think it's easy to grasp where there's not a ton of rules about the elevated or signature events, right, Josh? If you finish in the top 50 in the prior PGA Tour season, you're in. So I think that's easy to look at and it's easily defined, right? We're not going to 4 or 5 different metrics to try to figure out who's in the event. So I think they do a good job there.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and then we can jump right into it. The playoffs, we talked about it last week, but it seems now after the St. Jude, there's a more of a discussion happening about the playoffs and what they either are or are not for professional golf. What's your assessment of what you saw this past weekend in Memphis?
It's a little bit weird that there's a few things to it that it's first of all in Memphis, right? I mean, Memphis is sort of a big area, but it's not a prime location for it. On the other hand, the reason it's in Memphis is because FedEx is based in Memphis, right? I mean, that's where a lot of their headquarters and a lot of their stuff goes on. They do so much good work for the community, Josh, though. Like the Hospital St. Jude is really cool. They have a recovering child with every single group, right? And they show them on 18 as they're finishing up, which is really cool. And some other stuff that they do with FedEx is really cool. So Josh, I don't love that location for the first playoff event, but that's where it's going to be. And there's not really much about it. Castle Pines, I'm interested about. That's a course we don't really see very much. So I'm interested to see what they kind of do and how that goes right this weekend upcoming. But yeah, it should be a pretty golf course at the end of the day, a spot we don't go to very much, which is a lot of fun. But Josh, what did you think as you were kind of monitoring through Memphis this last week?
I think the criticism is fair. I mean, you look at some of the aerial shots, especially Sunday. I know it was hot, and everybody's going to say, "Oh, it was warm and it's humid." It looked like a ghost town, and that to me just isn't. It doesn't create the environment that you want to create for an event that essentially has to try and rival majors. We talked about it last week, but these events, in my mind, should have gigantic crowds. They should be held at major U.S. cities. The playoffs need to rival the majors in terms of the vibe they're creating, even if the history isn't necessarily there, like the stature of the tournaments themselves or the FedEx Cup playoffs isn't there. But the point system doesn't make a lot of sense either to me. Seeing guys make these gigantic jumps because they're winning these events where, there isn't really any like crowd or it doesn't really math. At the end of this thing, we're going to crown a season-long winner. And let's be real, they aren't the season-long winner. It's either Scotty Scheffler or Xander Schauffele, and it's nobody else. Like, no matter who wins the FedEx Cup playoffs, it's one of those two guys who will be player of the year, who did have the best year. And that's just pretty much it. So to me, I'd rather see the FedEx Cup playoffs just get a full rebrand rather than continuing to kind of perpetuate this thing that just creates a lot of confusion. How much of this do you think is tied to the fact that we're just playing more stroke play? And, the first playoff event has the same number of players as the last signature event or every signature event, essentially. Because, I think back to when the playoffs maybe felt like it had more juice. We were coming from full field events to 70 or so players, or, maybe it was 120. But you had this better element of whittling down the field that seems to be completely missing right now from the current format of regular season into playoffs.
Yeah, Josh, and I think it's going to get some sort of rebrand. I have no idea what that looks like when eventually, and who knows when this is ever going to happen, when Liv comes back, right, and we have this deal with the PIF that finally goes through, right? We have no idea what that looks like at this point. But yeah, Josh, I think just playing 72 events stroke play just in and every single week, we did it at the Olympics. We've done it all season long. So I think people get a little bit fatigued with that. And Josh, I think your point about the first FedEx Cup event looking like a regular signature event is valid, right? I mean, it was pretty much the same thing. And I think that is not good for the PGA Tour. They have to find a way to kind of brand this playoffs, right, in a different structure. So that's why I'm excited about the idea that people have where we move this from a 72 event stroke play to maybe something else, maybe introduce match play. We saw the U.S. Amateur last week, Josh, that they play 48 holes. I believe they play, 36 holes. I think it's 36 holes of stroke play. And then they do a cut, Josh, where they cut down to, I think it's like 64. And then they do a March Madness style bracket where they're playing match play against each other. So maybe that's an idea. I mean, I know you can say, well, we play stroke play all year and then we go to this. Well, Josh, I mean, we have to find a way to be a little different. Maybe and if we try the match play and it doesn't work for a year, maybe then they move from it, right? If it doesn't work then and people don't like it, then we move it. But so I think looking at the U.S. Amateur and going by that could be a good way. But Josh, I understand why they're hesitant to do that because of TV, right? Match play can sometimes be a more boring product for the TV. Less golf balls in the air equals less things to look at. So, and especially if some matches get out of hand too, right, Josh? That's the whole thinking behind it, I think. So I don't know what the answer is, Josh, but I think 40 or 72 event stroke play events get a little tiresome towards the end of the year. Yeah,
and I think it's tough too because of the timing. You're going from you have a break between the last major and the first playoff event, and you don't really have any signature events in the middle that are moving the needle. And it's almost like you need the playoffs to start immediately after that last major if you want to sort of capture that energy that you still have at that point in the season. I just feel like, and I understand some people are going to say, well, the Olympics was this year, that made it different. Shifting it 1 week, one way or another, does not change the vibe that we saw this past week. Just doesn't. And, at the end of the day, I agree. I think they should be reevaluating everything, not worrying so much about, TV. I would argue at this point that TV is the dying venue of where people consume, professional golf. And if anything, there's an opportunity to have more content, more matches in more places, and have more venues be full. Like, think about a NCAA style, like the NCAA tournament in basketball, where, you've got regions, and you've got people qualifying through regions, players playing through regions into a match play, or even if it's stroke play, just doing something a little different to get some of that juice flowing. But for now, we didn't talk about it, but we have the PGA Tour schedule that dropped for next year, and absolutely no changes. And I guess we just hope here that when we do see that LIV and PGA Tour unification, we don't know what that will look like, but we at least have to hope that it will be a better product overall. Maybe we'll see a scenario where the top 25 from both sides will end up competing coming down the stretch for that almighty title. Or maybe we won't. Who knows?
Or maybe they'll just never come up with an agreement, right, Josh? We're here a year and a half almost, it seems like, after they announced this agreement, Josh. And are we any further than when we started? I think we might be, but I think we might have gone backwards.
Yeah, I would agree. Speaking of not going backwards, let's talk about the BMW here coming up at Castle Pines in Denver. Is this going to be the week that Scottie Scheffler gets back in the winner's circle?
I mean, he's the favorite, right? So I think you're good on saying that. He needs a top 4 or better to claim first place. The only person that can take him in the FedEx Cup standing is Xander, and he needs a win. So Josh, I think you'll see Scottie and Xander battling on Sunday to find this spot. Wouldn't it be really crazy if Scottie's had this just amazing year and he's been leading in points all season, and then the second to last FedEx Cup event, Xander wins and Scottie plays bad for some reason, and Xander vaults up to number 1 and starts 2 strokes ahead on Sunday or on Thursday next week at East Lake? Wouldn't that be crazy?
It would be crazy, but it would be fitting. I mean, he has had also a very good year.
Yes,
it
for
goes
sure.
back to the point that we talked about before, where no matter what happens in the playoffs, it's one of the two of them. Like it's Scottie or Xander. They have had the best season without any question. Any players in particular that you're watching this weekend outside of, say, the top 2 guys there? Are you watching anybody else?
Not a guy in perfect, not looking at a guy in particular, but looking at the bubble more so, looking at that 30 number, right, as we get down to East Lake. There's some fun guys right on the edge there, I think, like Tommy Fleetwood sitting at 31. That's going to be interesting to see what he does. Denny McCarthy, a guy that I've talked about on here a good amount, he's at 30. Matthew Fitzpatrick, former U.S. Open champion, a guy that's been up and down this year, is at 36. And then Will Zalatoris, a guy who has bounced back pretty well, I think, from really, really crazy back surgery. He's at 37. So, all he has to do is play, pretty decently well to make his way to East Lake. Josh, wouldn't that be a really cool comeback for Will Zalatoris, who was sidelined for an entire season, if he were to come back? And, he hasn't won, of course, but still to make it to the final playoff event would be pretty cool for a guy like Will Zalatoris.
Can I just say I was shocked when I saw he was in the top 50. It had completely flown over my head that he was even in the top 50, because to your point, we haven't seen him a lot. He's been playing a lot, obviously, but we haven't seen him really contending. He's contended a couple times, but not the way he had been contending before the back injury. It seems like he's making a solid recovery here, and it would be really interesting to see if he could put himself in contention here this weekend. What about I'm going to throw a couple other names at you, because there are a couple of guys who played absolutely abysmal this past weekend. Max Homa and Rory McIlroy.
Oh, Max Homa. I don't even begin where to think on him. He's a guy that he he came into Augusta. He played super well, Josh. He almost won on Sunday, right? And ends up being T3. And we said, oh, this is going to be a huge year for Max Homa. And then he kind of does nothing, right? The rest of the year, he kind of just pedals and plays in all the signature events and plays in all the big tournaments, right? And then he comes in dead last at the BMW. And just by playing well early enough in the season, he finds himself at 43, I believe, Josh. And if he plays well, he can make East Lake, which is kind of crazy too, Josh. But yeah, we need a big week from Max Homa. What did you think watching that battle for last between him and Rory and some other players?
I couldn't believe it. Like, you know, and I guess it was more believable with Max and how he's played. He just hasn't had it the last few months. You know, just kind of a shock. Rory almost seems to be disengaged. We've seen him turn that on before, though, where he will look lost out there on the golf course. And then the next week, you know, he'll turn around and win. So he's never out of it. But just a really odd thing to watch, to see the two of them, two big names, just stumbling down there at the bottom of the leaderboard.
Yeah.
And I mean, playing bad, like there's, you know, finishing a few over in an event like this. Okay. But, you know, I believe, one of them was 10. I think Max was 10 over. And I want to say, Rory was like 6 over, or maybe 5 over. Just, I mean, not even threatening anything. Just a wild scenario to see play out. This weekend, though, I'm watching a couple players, Akshay Bhatia, and the reason why I say that is because in the power rankings this weekend, he is actually ahead of Ludwig Aubert and Nick Dunlap, which is so interesting because, you know, this is a guy that I think a lot of people have a tendency to forget. But he has played some incredible golf this year, and it would be the least surprising thing in the world if his name were in that top 5 on Sunday this week, or if he were actually winning the event. It would just not be a surprise. And then, of course, Adam Scott, who's now up to 15th. And, you know, in the power rankings for this event, you know, top 10 finish here jolts him way up again. Safely in the top 30, of course. Just a really, really interesting storyline when you consider the fact that he was qualifying to get into the U.S. Open. Just miraculous stuff.
Yeah, I almost think it's so much more fun in a way to watch some of these guys and where they're kind of going to be standing as we head into East Lake than the top of the leaderboard. Of course, if Scotty and Xander are fighting on Sunday for that number 1 spot, that's going to be more compelling than the bubble. But it's kind of fun to watch that bubble at the same time, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about Brooks getting another win over on Liv. That's not insignificant. He is now the winningest Liv golfer.
Well, man, if you told me that was going to happen a couple years ago, I think I would have not bet on that, right? Josh, this is a guy in Brooks Koepka who's been very, very pointed that he doesn't really care about PGA Tour wins, right? He's there for the majors. So I thought this kind of philosophy would kind of fall over to Liv, but Josh, the exact opposite has happened. He had 5, like he said, 5 wins on the startup tour. Good for the most in that Liv Tour's prowess, Josh. I know we haven't talked much about Liv, but have you had a chance to really watch it, and kind of what's your thoughts on that tour?
You know, we've talked about it a couple of times, and I've watched some, not a ton. It's mainly been the events here in the U.S. and not necessarily the ones that are on tape delay. You know, you know how I feel about tape delay golf or sports.
Oh, I can't watch tape delay at all. I feel the exact same way. Yeah,
can't do it. But it's interesting because in some ways, Liv Golf is going through the same thing that the PGA Tour is, where it's trying to find an identity. And when you watch, you can tell. Like,
I think they have a bigger identity crisis than the PGA Tour.
Yeah, like when I watch a Liv Golf event, there is so much going on. And I know this is something that really bothers you, is there's a lot going on the screen. It's a little chaotic. It feels a little bit like a Indy race, I guess, or a NASCAR race or something with the graphics and whatnot, which I think is intentional. They're experimenting with a lot of like lines on greens, and you've got, different stats getting thrown out left and right. Tweets that just aren't real tweets. I think that they've been caught before. I've looked up some of the tweets that they show on the broadcast. Actually, that was one of the early things that recall standing out to me personally, was they'd show a tweet on the screen, and I did like a search for it on Twitter, and the tweet just didn't exist, or like the account didn't exist. So, there's all of that. But to me, it seems like they should be putting more focus on the event experience, which who knows, they probably are. We haven't been to a live event, so it's not something that I can really comment on with too much certainty. But I would assume there's more focus being put on the event experience for the people on grounds rather than the product on TV. How do you feel about it when you watch it?
Yeah, Josh, and I think we've talked so much about YouTube golf and how that's made their way. And Josh, maybe they go into that lane. Maybe they have to get off of TV, right? We heard about how the CW was kind of the only network that really wanted them, right? I'd be interested to hear if the CW wants to renew, or if another television partner is interested, right, Josh? But yeah, it's just so busy. I mean, there's just so many things going on at once. You have all the leaderboard, which takes up about 20 or 25% of the screen, up all the time and constantly moving around, right? You have those lines on greens like you were mentioning. You have the music in the background, which, Josh, the music in the background isn't necessarily a deterrence for me. I don't necessarily really care about it that much. But Josh, the difference in audio levels is crazy. I mean, they go to one hole and it's blasting, and they go to the next hole and it's very, very low. It's just I know we talked about it a little bit before, Josh. It's just a difference of where these mics and where these speakers are placed, right? These speakers are playing the music are strategically placed in spots where fans are to be louder, Josh. But then you go to an isolated part on the course and you can barely hear the music. So it's just kind of weird to your brain, right, to go back and forth. And are they even on the same golf course still? Because it's just so much different with how these guys are playing in the event. I mean, we've seen guys back off of putts because the music's too loud, right? So, Josh, I think they're definitely in an identity crisis when it comes to the TV product, right, Josh?
Yeah, and I think that's just part of that may be part of their calculation, in they're sacrificing a bit of the TV element to enhance the experience on site. It's you can't control the wild, right? Like it's out in nature, and controlling the audio experience from a television standpoint, next to impossible when you're out in the wild like that. But it's just one of those things where it's jarring to the viewer, it's jarring to the person who's listening, even if you just have it on as background noise. Like I have a couple times just have it, on while I'm doing other things around the house on like a Sunday, when if a PGA Tour event is on like rain delay or something, and the jumps in audio up and down is just crazy. Like 1 minute you can hear it clearly, the next minute you cannot hear it clearly. And it just makes it difficult to watch. And even for the casual fan, I think that hurts, because I always look at it like that's probably the most important thing when it comes to getting fans who aren't gigantic golf fans into watching professional golf, which I think is who they're trying to capture, because certainly the traditional golf fans aren't watching much live golf. But
no, it feels so cheesy, Josh, and then all the talk about it being exhibition golf tour, Josh, it only heightens with their own doing, right? And I think when you watch that, you're like, wow, this is almost like a video game. I could turn on my PlayStation 5 and play PGA Tour 2K23 and have a similar experience, right? So I think that's just really weird with live. I think if they go to YouTube, they can get away with more of that. They can push into the YouTube golf crowd, maybe get some more shorts going and get some more stuff with creators on YouTube, especially, they have one of the biggest creators in the world on their tour already, and they're not utilizing YouTube more in a way that Bryson, who knows the ins and outs of YouTube golf, can help them with it. So that's just something that they could look at.
Yeah, it's tough. And it also begs the question, like, for all of the success that, players have had with videos, going viral and really building out successful channels for themselves, it doesn't necessarily translate to more people actually watching your tour stops, your events. Right.
But is that what they want, Josh? Do they want a lot of people watching the CW? I don't even think that's a goal.
Yeah, you know what? Like, I don't necessarily think they care too much about it, because I think they know that's not where, the ad dollars are ultimately.
Right.
Like ultimately the ad dollars are in clips. The ad dollars are in the viral, short form stuff that's on YouTube, that's on TikTok, that's on Instagram. And, getting people to sit down and watch 4+ hours of golf on TV is just a hard sell. And maybe they just don't care about that.
I call myself one of the bigger professional golf watching fans, and I lasted about 6 minutes watching live on Saturday. So that's just where I stand.
It's definitely tough. All right. My last question for you, gun to your head. You have to choose between Xander Schauffele and Scotty Scheffler this weekend. Who are you taking?
Give me Xander Schauffele. Had a really good finish on Sunday. He shot a really low number to almost win that golf tournament. If Hideki doesn't birdie 17 and 18, we might see Xander on the podium, and we might see a new number one. So give me Xander.
Scotty's going to figure out how to putt, and he's going to dominate this weekend. Book it.
Pretty cool watching them play at altitude this week, Josh. Balls are going to be going a long way.
Going to be some long drives. Hey, that is going to do it for this edition of Out of Bounds. Follow us on TikTok and Instagram for more this week. And remember, whether it's down the middle or out of bounds, keep on swinging.
You've been listening to Out of Bounds. If it's coverage, debate, or discussion of pro and local golf, we'll be talking about it. Be sure to visit the website. Find us on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. See you next time on Out of Bounds.